Hi, I'm Jenny Brown. Welcome to this week's MFB News. It's been a week of lots of change. We've seen new Prime Minister Liz Truss come into position in the last week, and we're going to be talking a bit more about how that can impact things in the mortgage market going forwards. And we've also had the very sad news of the passing of our Queen and seen a new King come into reign as well. So a lot of very mixed emotions for people this week. But yeah, I hope everybody's doing okay. Now, in terms of what we've got for you in this week's episode, we're going to be looking at the changes in the lender market, updating you on what's been happening there. We're then going to talk about the impact of rising interest rates and what this has meant in terms of how much you can borrow on a buy-to-let mortgage, and there has been some fairly profound changes there. And then lastly, we're going to pay some consideration to the new appointment of Liz Truss and what the plans that she has in place, in particular the energy price cap, how that may impact interest rates going forwards. Okay, so lender changes in the last week, so I'm very sure it won't come as a huge surprise to you that we've seen another round of rate increases. So we've seen Barclays increase rates by 20 basis points. Landbay have increased their 10-year fixed rates. Interestingly, they have reduced their trackers. And there is a bit of a theme with this at the moment. So those lenders who are lending on variable pricing are starting to bring the margins down those slightly in some cases. So quite counterintuitive, but actually we certainly are seeing more people considering variable rate products, asking us about them as well. And we talked about this in previous weeks. I guess it's a kind of almost a guessing game. I mean, who's got a crystal ball? But in terms of, if you can have a very, very low variable rate or a higher fixed rate, then you're kind of banking by taking the variable about how high interest rates will go and how quickly. And therefore, only in hindsight are you going to ever know if it was the right decision. But some people are certainly becoming far more open to the idea of variable rates. Now, we've also seen the Mortgage Works increase some of their rates and also withdraw some of their 80% loan to value rates. The Nottingham Building Society have increased their rates by 30 basis points. We've seen BM Solutions make unusually large changes actually for them, so increasing rates by between 50 basis points and 75 basis points. Capital Home Loans have increased their rates by 30 basis points, TSB by 35 basis points. NatWest, I think, are the highest this week. They've increased their rates by up to 80 basis points and 0.8% there. Now, we've seen the mortgage lender increase their rates, and Accord also increase their pricing by up to 40 basis points. We have seen the Family Building Society reintroduce fixed rates. So they pulled away from fixed rates a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, they were just trying to get their pricing sorted out. They've now come back in with some fixed rate products. And lastly, in a more positive tone, we've seen Foundation Home Loans introduce some green mortgage, so available for properties with an EPC rating of A to C, some green discounted rates, which are available for buy-to-lets, HMOs and holiday letting as well. And actually looking at the pricing where it starts from 3.49%, and keeping in mind that Foundation Home Loans are a specialist lender, so HMOs, limited companies, holiday lets, landlords with really large portfolios, and by really large I mean more than 10 properties, actually the pricing there is very, very good. So in terms of where this leaves us in relation to pricing, so personal fixed rates, first of all, 2-year fixed from 3% now, 5 years from 3.1%, 10 years from 4.49%, variable rates starting from 2.29%. So just kind of thinking back to what I said a moment ago about people really starting to consider more variables to trackers and discount from standard variable rate type mortgages as an option. 2.29% suddenly would feel much more attractive. So, if you're willing to take a bit of a gamble on interest rates and where they're going to go, and we will talk about that in a bit more detail later, certainly worth considering. Now, limited company pricing, so 2-year fixed rates are now from 3.99, 5 years from 4.39, 10 years from 4.49, and variables from 3.14%. And one of the impacts of interest rates increasing has meant, and I think it is an unintended consequence, we have touched on this in previous weeks actually, is that the amount you can borrow per pound of rental income has diminished, has reduced because of the higher mortgage interest costs. And let me explain to you why this is. So rental calculations are quite a complicated thing because the calculation varies depending on lots of different kind of parts to the structure of the transaction. So, for example, if you were an individual taking a 2-year fixed rate, the rental calculation would be 145% coverage, assuming an interest rate of 5.5%. If you were a personal borrower taking a 5-year fixed rate, it could be 145% coverage, assuming a notional interest rate of maybe 5.5%, maybe more of a notional rate of 4.5%, or actually the interest pay rate that you'd be paying. And bearing in mind that 5-year fixed rates have been at rates of sub 3%, actually the rental calculation could have been 145% at something like 2.99. The same rule applies to limited companies, so 125% coverage is the standard stress rate there, but again at 5.5% for 2 or 3 year fixed rates, or also variable rates. On 5-year fixed rates it would be 125% at maybe 5.5%, maybe a notional rate of like 4.5%, and then potentially the pay rate as well, which could have been as low as 2.89, 2.99, depending on where you're looking back in time in terms of where pricing has been in the previous 6 to 8 months. Now, there's other kind of complications that sit around this. So, for example, some lenders in personal borrowing may say, well, okay, you're borrowing personally, we should stress you at 145% coverage, but because you're a basic rate taxpayer, we're going to use a calculation of 125%. Also, if you're doing a like-for-like remortgage, you're just remortgaging and not raising any capital. Again, some lenders offer a slightly more generous calculation. But the key message here is actually that, irrespective of all of these things, because mortgage rates have increased, the actual rental calculation has become more punitive. So to put this into kind of context, if we take personal borrowing for an example, so last night I did a quick bit of research to check which was the most generous rental calculation I could find on the market right now. And the calculation that I found was as follows: 135% coverage, assuming a notional interest rate of 5.25%. And this would mean that per £100 of rental income that you receive per month, you could borrow £16,312. Rewind 6 months when the interest rates were more like 5-year fixes 2.99. The best rental calculation would have been then 145% coverage, assuming an interest rate of 2.99%. And that would have meant that per £100 of rental income, you could borrow £27,678. So essentially, per £100 of rental income now, you can borrow £10,000 worth of mortgage less. So it's very significant numbers here at play. The same thing applies to the limited company space. So last night, the most generous rental calculation that I could find for you was 125% coverage at 4.69%, which would have got you £20,469 per £100. Go back 6 to 8 months ago, the rental calculation would have been 125 at 2.99%, which would have got you £32,107. So almost £12,000 more in borrowing. So this is really what's going on. Now, what I would say is that we are definitely finding it more challenging for people. So when they're coming to us and saying, I want to remortgage, this is what I want to borrow, we're actually finding that even on a like-for-like basis, we are often, for higher gear properties, struggling to make the rental calculations work at the moment. Now, don't worry, if that applies to you, there's going to be always options available. There's always some way to make things work. So, for example, we may be able to arrange a product transfer for you. Most lenders are geared up to offering these now at relatively competitive rates. And actually, there are also different kind of options available. There's something called top slicing, which may be available to some of you as well. But I suppose the key message is that actually, in terms of borrowing money and the kind of metrics that sit behind the application, things have got a bit more complicated, even more complicated, I should say. So do give us a call and we can run through all of those numbers with you. Now we have Team Truss and Kwarteng leading the helm for us going forwards for the next couple of years at least. And I think it's going to be a really challenging time for them. They've come into reign at a very, very difficult point in the economy. So I think it's just going to be interesting to just take a moment to consider what their new appointments are going to herald for interest rates, in particular referencing the price cap that was announced yesterday. Now, we know that the rising energy prices have been a major driver in driving up inflation, essentially. They account for around 10% of inflation in the most recent forecasts. Now, in early August, the Bank of England had predicted that inflation would hit 13% by the end of the year. But because of spiralling wholesale energy prices throughout the month, actually some analysts were penciling in much bigger hikes, with Goldman Sachs forecasting that inflation could peak at over 22% in January. Now, an economist called Hugh Pill has been testifying to the Treasury Select Committee, and he has said that in the short term, the government help with energy bills for households and businesses will likely result in lower inflation. However, In the longer term, the multi-billion support package and tax cuts will probably lead to slightly stronger inflation. He added that the impact of such policies will determine what the Bank of England decides to do with interest rates. So some analysts are forecasting a 50 percentage point rise next week that would take rates to 2.25%, but others expect a higher hike of 0.75%, obviously bringing base rate up to 2.5%. Now, I think the Bank of England are at a very, very challenging crossroad in terms of what they do with interest rates here. So obviously we have the energy price cap, which really should largely knock out the largest chunk of inflation. So there is a school of thought for saying, well, actually, you know what, we don't need to keep putting interest rates up because inflation is going to be suppressed massively compared to what's been predicted. So let's just kind of leave things alone. Let's see how things shake out and kind of come back to it in the future. But for now, actually, we should see inflation come right down. There's a second school of thought, and apparently this is the one which most economists are sitting on side of, who are saying that actually, yes, of course, dropping the energy cuts down, and it is a temporary freeze on payments will bring inflation down, but actually with the planned tax cuts, they're also being considered to be brought in. These are inflationary things. This could drive up inflation. So I think the Bank of England have got a very, very difficult choice. But what we know is quite apparent is that actually, despite the immediate cut or freeze in fuel costings and therefore the impact this will have on inflation, analysts are still forecasting between a 50 and 75 basis point increase next month. So definitely, not next month, next week. So yeah, a very, very difficult time for the Bank of England, a very difficult time for borrowers. But as always, if you did want to give us a call to discuss your mortgage options, while the rates have been increasing, there still are some not bad rates to be had. If you go back 5 years ago, and this is where it gets really interesting actually, we have customers or clients of ours whose 5-year fixed rates are coming up to end, and we're going back to them and saying, well, actually, these are the rates that you can have now. And a lot of them are saying, well, actually, that's fine because that's what I was paying anyway. So we're essentially back to interest rates 5 years ago, not crazy, ridiculous high interest rates that no one can live with. We're just kind of rewinding things to 5 years ago, and we all survived that. So I suspect we'll survive this one as well. And that is everything from me this week. I know it's a really, really worrying time for lots of people. Apparently around 50% of people are really concerned about mortgage costs. As landlords, we often have many mortgages rather than just one to worry about. So I do appreciate it's a very, very concerning time for everybody. So if you do want to give us a call, even just to have a conversation around the art of the possible, discuss some options and really just talk about how you may be able to shore things up, we really are very, very happy to speak to absolutely everybody. 0345 345 6788, or have a look at our website. I will see you again same time next week. Until then, take care.